Matthew Dowling is a former Pennsylvania state representative who served as a state representative for the 51st Legislative District in Fayette and Somerset Counties for 3 terms, 6 years. And Matthew is on the line with us here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. So when you were a state representative, what was a typical day like for you?
Being a state representative, a typical day can go from one extreme to the other. When we're in legislative session, which the Pennsylvania House is about 100 to 110 days a year, the day, of course, starts out by going to the House floor. We open with prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance, and then bills will be referred to different committee meetings. You take a break for committee meetings, you go to caucus, and then you come back and you finish voting on what is on the schedule for the day. If you're not in session, your day can be even more interesting because you are in your legislative district back at home, meeting with constituents, talking about their issues and their problems. And you can go from walking down a creek with a constituent that there's flooding coming from, that you have to try to deal with that, to dealing with a hospital administrator that's having funding problems for a new construction project or something of that nature. So it's a wide range. I always tell people that you have to be a subject matter expert in absolutely everything when you are a state representative.
Is it hard to get your constituents' issues heard because there are so many other representatives that want to get their constituents' issues heard, and there's not time for everything?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a lot more bills that are proposed than are actually ever voted on or ever passed. So if you're drafting a bill for your constituent, it may not get through in that legislative session. That being said, the problems that we're handling, like flooding issues, et cetera, back at home, those are normally farmed out to state agencies that would deal with that, like PennDOT, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, would take care of any roadway issues that we have. And we have a staff that helps with those constituent issues. Every year, we received or communicated with over 10,000 constituents that had an issue that we needed to help address.
Yeah. So I guess on the one hand, you've got to be the constituency person, and then on the other hand, you're kind of representing the Republican Party, aren't you? So is it hard to balance that?
Well, I think regardless of what political party you're a member of, you are elected to serve the 68,000 people that are in your legislative district and within those geographic boundaries. So you have to serve people, whether they are Republicans or Democrats, with whatever issues that they have. That's not always the easiest thing to do, but as a representative, you are elected to be their voice. Likewise, they know when they go to vote what you stand for and what your principles are and what your beliefs are. So neither side should be shocked whenever it comes to a situation like that.
So when did you realize that you wanted to get into politics?
So I've always been, let's say, community-minded, active in my local community, member of the local Chamber of Commerce. I've been involved on the fringes of other political campaigns going back to 2008 when Senator John McCain ran for president. I volunteered with his campaign, and I continued to do so on some local campaigns and some other campaigns. And at one point in time, I started having a conversation with some political operatives, and they said, you should run for office yourself. Never was my intention, but I signed on and I did, and then I did so a couple more times to serve out my 6 years that I was in office.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people, politics was never really the plan. It was an accident. But once you were in the job, do you feel like it was somewhere that you wanted to be?
Yeah, I definitely had a skill set that lent itself to serving in political office. Now that being said, there's a lot of stress that comes with the position, a lot of time away from family. So there are, now that I've retired from the Pennsylvania House, some glimmers of hope for some more substantial quality family time and things of that nature that I just wasn't able to enjoy as thoroughly when I was in office.
Yeah. And now that you're out of office, is it maybe frustrating that you might see things happening and issues that you feel strongly about that you can't directly do anything about anymore?
Absolutely. And I'm going to address that in a couple different ways. Number one, just this past week, we saw the election of the Speaker of the House in the Pennsylvania State House. And, so that was kind of hard to watch from the sidelines rather than actually being there and having a vote. That said, advocacy is so important no matter what issue you're working on. And our elected representatives, our elected senators, they need to listen to the constituency. So if you can be a strong vocal advocate, there's still a place for you to make legislative changes without directly having a vote within the chamber. So, I plan to continue my work on some legislative priorities and to advocate for myself and for those issues, and would be open to advocating for others as well.
And what do you make of America at the moment? You were a Republican representative, so I'm guessing the president at the moment wouldn't be your first choice. So what do you make of the whole administration and everything politically?
I think one of the problems we're seeing here in the United States of America is that we have become extremely polarized. The right is moving further right and the left is moving further left. And there's really no, let's say, civil discourse or debate that is happening in the chambers. People kind of go into everything with a mindset that they already know how they're going to vote and how they're going to do something. And I kind of long to see civility and that discussion and debate return to the political process so that we can really hear out each side's ideas and platforms and then make an educated decision on which direction we should go. And that's kind of the idea of the new podcast that I have, Commonalities, which you can find on any of the major podcast download sites, or you can visit commonalities.online for more information about that show. But, I that's my point, that we need to come closer together so we can make the best decisions for everyone in the United States.
Yeah. And why do you think we're more polarized now? Because it's, of course, happening in America, but it's not just in America. In Britain as well recently. Is it social media? Is it something else?
I think social media and media in general definitely plays a part in it, but I was a politician, so I can blame this on the politicians and not feel bad about it.
Yeah.
Politicians have become very cutthroat in the way that they campaign, especially here in the United States. We're seeing that more now in Great Britain as well. Where, political advertising makes a huge difference. And, here in the United States, television and radio is prominent, but especially sending out mail pieces, a postcard that you receive in the mailbox. In a typical 3-month campaign, you'll see from one side 7 to 8 pieces of mail that land in your mailbox that eventually end up in the trash. But the messages that those mail pieces are carrying are normally very negative about their opposition. And because of that, it has, I believe, made your average American more polarized, because they're used to seeing people kind of screaming at each other rather than civilly debating. And so, they think they have to pick one side or the other, where really we can both agree that there's a problem someplace, but have two different ways to solve it. And we have to talk that out to figure out the best way of doing so. So, I think that's one of the lead reasons why we're seeing the polarization of politics globally.
Of course, with your podcast, it's called Commonalities, and there is more that unites us than what divides us, a lot of people say. Do you try and unite people on your podcast?
We do. We also educate people from each point of view. There's no denying the fact that I'm a conservative Republican. I have a legislative voting record that you can look at. So as the host of the show, I try to be a little more middle of the road. And I always welcome a discussion if we have one guest on one episode that is talking about the right point of view. I'm always willing to have someone from the left come on and have the same discussion. And I'll question them in the same way so that I understand where they're coming from as well. And I think that benefits our listeners.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense, because even if your goal was to argue and convince people of the right-wing view, you'd still want a left-wing view because you don't want to be living in an echo chamber.
Sure. And I could go on my show and do my best Rush Limbaugh impersonation or whatever. And just be hard right and cut to the core, and this is my beliefs and this is what I think and this is right. But if you do that, you're only going to be talking to your base. You're not going to be having a conversation where the other side's willing to listen, because you're just espousing and yelling your beliefs at them. So I think through the show we present that in a different way. Where I think you could be a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, regardless, and listen to the show and gain some insight.
Now, the midterms a couple of months ago in America, a lot of predictions were that there would be this red wave, but that didn't really happen as much as people thought it would. Why do you think that happened?
Well, the best, and I've given this a lot of thought and some study, the best solution or scenario that I can come up with is the fact that there was the release of the court case or the Supreme Court's ruling on Roe versus Wade. And, abortion is an issue that mobilizes people, whether they are for or against. And I simply believe that the pro-choice individuals who would be left-leaning were motivated by that court case's decision being released. And so they showed up at the polls. The other thing we're seeing here in the United States, and it differs state by state, but ultimately makes a difference in a national election, is the use of voting by mail. So, in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, we've had absentee voting, where if you were in the hospital or sick or et cetera, you had an extenuating circumstance, you had to travel for business, you could request a mail-in ballot, and then you mailed it in. Those weren't used in a very wide capacity. A couple years ago, and I was in office and voted for it when it happened, we instituted no excuse mail-in voting, where anyone can request a mail-in ballot. They receive that ballot, they can put it back in the mail, and they don't have to go into a polling place. A lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives don't believe that there is safety and security in voting by mail. So, they are hard and fast to showing up on the polls on election day for one day. Now that mail-in voting has happened, whether you like it or whether you don't, it's not going to leave anytime real soon. So I think the right needs to embrace that, because right now requests for mail-in ballots are 6-1, with the Democrats leading in the number of mail-in ballots requested. So they're going and asking, Aunt Sally, hey, do you want to vote? And she may be in a nursing home or unable to walk real well. They're getting her the mail-in ballot. She's sending it back in. And Aunt Sally of the Republican side, there's just no effort being taken to make sure that they get to the polls, or maybe they can't get to the polls. So the turnout is really leaning to the left right now. And my final point is just to clarify: if Republicans don't accept mail-in voting and embrace it, I think it's going to be an uphill battle.
Why is it that right-wing people and Republicans are less likely to use mail-in votes? Because you say it's because maybe they don't trust the security and all that, but I would guess no matter what your political opinions are, you would still have the same worries.
Yeah, so you do have the same worries. I think a lot of it came from President Trump. President Trump was not a fan of mail-in voting, had made some statements and tweets telling the people that were on his side to show up to the polls and to go that day. And I'm not going to deny that there aren't some security issues with mail-in voting. We're using post office boxes. We're dropping it in the mail. The mail's pretty secure. I've sent checks in the mail to pay bills. But that being said, it's not as secure as showing up to a poll, showing identification, walking inside, and in that volunteer, knowing exactly who you are and knowing that you've only voted once. So there are ways that we could strengthen the security of mail-in voting. But if I had a crystal ball, I would say it's not going to go away.
And what would you say is the biggest issue right now facing America?
That's a great question. I think that the economy is a huge issue that people have concern for, and rightfully so. We see inflation just going through the roof. The way we tax our small businesses, that's a big issue within the United States. Like I said, if I had to give a top 5 or a top 10 list, I would throw medical and recreational marijuana on there as high priorities. Not because they're the highest priorities, but because our constituency are very interested in those issues. And those laws are rapidly changing state by state. The legality and access to abortion is a big issue now that the Supreme Court has reversed the Roe decision and made that clarification this past summer. And for pro-lifers, they definitely want to fight that. And as always in the United States, because of our rural background and the way we were founded, many of our constituents are firm believers in the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. So that continues to be an issue that the left is looking at it from one way and the right looking at it from another way. Globally, I think we're viewed a little bit differently with some of our beliefs as far as that goes. But I would say those are the big priorities, whether you are in state government or the federal government here in the United States right now.
A lot of them are things that, like bearing arms, for example, a lot of people, if they're on the left, they might feel it's never going to change. If you were to do any kind of reform, it would never pass.
You would have a difficult time passing it. But what we have here in the United States, what we're seeing is And the left is very good at this, and I give them credit, incremental change that happens that eventually gets you to your ultimate goal. So if your ultimate goal is to ban guns completely, you would start with maybe what we refer to as red flag laws, where people with certain mental health conditions would be barred from owning a firearm or possessing a firearm. Then you would go to bans of certain types of firearms. People are saying, why does a magazine or a clip need to have so many rounds in it? So we want to limit the amount of ammunition that's in a firearm. Those are the incremental changes that I think could be coming. And you'll have people on the left say, no one's coming for your guns. And they're not coming for your guns today, but there is an erosion of the right to keep and bear arms that people like myself who sit on the conservative on the right side can see happening. And that's why we're so worried about what ultimately happens. Because, I'm not thinking that we'll pass legislation this term to ban firearms, but where will we be in 20 or 50 years if we have that incremental change?
Well, what's coming up for you? Do you have any particular podcast episodes that you're excited about and any other projects?
Well, I don't have my podcast schedule in front of me. We do have great guests on all the time. Just to give another shout out, the podcast is Commonalities. We tag it as discussing all the things your grandmother told you not to discuss with friends, politics, finances, and religion. And my grandmother used to literally say, listen, you don't want to offend your friends, so don't talk about religion with them. Don't talk about politics. Don't talk about money. So on the show, we talk about all of those things.
Yeah.
And those are the big items that need to be discussed and need to be out in the open. So that's the reason why we do the podcast. I have one book that I was a co-author on. It's called Empowered in Pittsburgh. It's a book for young professionals trying to navigate the world of professional life after what we refer to here in the United States as college or post-secondary education. Just kind of getting your feet wet in adulthood, and how do you become a productive member of society? That's been out for several years, but I'm working on a new piece that I hope to have out in the fall of 2023. That it talks about my time in public office, kind of a memoirs of sort. And our working title is I Fell from the Mountain Halfway Up. Now, where do I go from here? And, I had some personal struggles with addiction that caused me to get out of the political life, at least for the time being. And so the book is going to discuss that and other lessons that I've learned through my time in public office.
Well, where are we able to keep up to date with you?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I just signed up for a TikTok, although I don't completely understand TikTok. Also on LinkedIn for professional reasons. But you can always visit me at Matthew, D as in David, Dowling, DOWLING.com, MatthewDDowling.com. And that links to all of my social media sites and so forth. You can view episodes of Commonalities, or you can listen to episodes in the podcast format, all right from that site.
Excellent. Well, many thanks for talking to us today. It's been great to have you on the show.
Great talking to you. You take care.